viral. It was everywhere.
It's very, very foreign to Arab culture to talk about personal things publicly.
12 years before that, I was under the bombs of Beirut.
I didn't go to therapy. I think I should.
This is Al Empire. Stories of exceptional Arabs around the world and their journey to the top.
Hey, I'm Hiba Fisher.
And I'm Dana Balut.
And today on El Empire.
What would be the first two lines of your obituary? What would you like them to be?
I think I'd actually kind of want like one of the really bad headlines. You know what I mean? Like something about me being a devil worshipper out to corrupt the youth and spread sin and homosexuality and incite revolutionary actions against government. And all these things have been said, right, as though they were necessarily insults. And I think I'd actually really like that to be on my tombstone.
Okay. This is Hamid Sinno.
Hamid Khalil Sinno. So I am a singer-songwriter and LGBT rights activist.
Hamid is the lead singer-songwriter for Mashrou Leila. If you haven't heard of them, get out from under the rock. The band is often described as an indie Lebanese rock band. To me, honestly, they encompass so many genres. But anyway, I met Hamid for this interview in New York at our friend Dina's apartment. And I've known Hamid for about 15 years now. We went to high school together. But at the time that we were meeting, I hadn't seen him in about a year. So it was really nice to see his face. And in those years that I've known him, a lot has happened. There are big things, small things, personal things, but then there's this big fact that Hamid and his bandmates, Haig, Carl, and Firas, became famous. They've recorded several albums, sold out concerts around the world, and of course, made international headlines. And at the time that we met in New York, they were making even more headlines after their concert in Lebanon was canceled and the band was accused of blasphemy. Death threats were pouring in and they were being bullied and harassed. It wasn't an ideal moment, but I'm grateful for Hamid for taking the time to do this with us. Also, as a disclaimer, this episode acknowledges the existence of sex and sexuality. Here we go. Okay, let's do test. Get closer to you. Okay. What'd you have for breakfast?
I actually do this thing every morning where I make a loaf of bread out of almond flour and then make a grilled cheese sandwich out of that.
You make the bread yourself?
Yeah, it takes a few minutes.
And you put it in the foot-in and everything?
I do it in the microwave because I'm lazy.
That's kind of genius. I want to go all the way back and start with your childhood. Where did you grow up?
Beirut, born and raised.
And what would you say Hamid, under 10 years old, was like?
I was very solitary, and my mother tells me that I was generally a very sort of like easily contented child. I'd just like keep to myself and draw and sing, and apparently I was happy, which is remarkable considering.
Why is it remarkable?
I think like the moment puberty kicked in, I became much more prone to like really intense bouts of depression, which kind of like marked me throughout high school and college and is a like constant struggle.
Who were your favorite artists back then?
I was really big on the Spice Girls, like every good gay child. I loved Michael Jackson so much. Like the first sort of album that I ever bought sort of my own accord was Michael Jackson's History album, which was a double cassette with a giant sort of statue of himself as the cover. So it was very impressive. Yeah, I guess that's who I was listening to. I think Tina Turner. We were in, so I'm half Jordanian, and we were in my grandmother's house in Amman, and there was a Tina Turner concert that my parents were watching on television in Jordan, and my father said that Tina Turner was very sexy, and I didn't know what that word meant. So I asked him what it meant, and of course he, probably explained it in a way that I didn't understand either, but I just retained that Tina Turner was sexy and that sexy was something good, and so I wanted to be like Tina Turner. We didn't come from a musical house in the sense where we were never sort of encouraged to learn instruments or forced to, or anything like that. But there was always so much music around my house. My dad was on the jazz committee for the Baalbek Festival, so there was, jazz all the time. So, one of my earliest memories is walking in on my parents, dancing on our balcony, listening to a Barry White vinyl. So there was always so much music that I don't know, it just seemed natural.
What are your first memories of singing?
First memories of singing. My mother bought me a little cassette recorder when I was a kid. So I'd steal my mother's mix cassettes and then try to record songs over them. And my parents did encourage me. They also, I guess, around puberty tried to shut me up a lot. My voice was doing strange things. But
What was your relationship like with your parents?
Complicated. My father and I had a very, very tense relationship. Sort of well into my 20s. We only kind of started to mend things the year before he died. He was a very complicated man. He was a very tortured man. So our relationship was not pleasant, and I wasn't exactly an easy teenager. I was, like I said, prone to bouts of depression and melodrama, and I just got in trouble so often. He was a very stressed, easily angered person, so we didn't get along very well. My mother is the exact opposite. She's a complete rock star and very supportive and always has been. And I think, sort of seeing her deal with my father when we were growing up, sort of forged this kind of solidarity between her and myself and my siblings, that is still sort of very much there, where we, see our mother as a comrade, not a parent.
If you look back at your childhood, is there one particular memory that kind of always comes back to you?
Yeah, but it's not a happy memory, to be honest. I guess whenever I think about my childhood, the first things I remember are either fights with my father or getting bullied at school. So I guess whenever I remember anything, it's either sort of, being people carrying me and charging towards a tree, or people cornering me and sort of slapping me around, putting gum in my hair because I had an afro. So then I ended up with a bunch of bald patches for a while because I had to cut the gum out, which is actually kind of funny in hindsight. I also distinctly remember people making fun of me singing, which is for some reason kind of cathartic in hindsight, and it just feels cathartic again to 15 years later make a career out of being a gay musician is nice, I guess.
The haters.
Yeah, I guess. The haters now too, I suppose, but that's another story.
What was the ammunition that a lot of these bullies would use against you?
What's weird is I guess all those people knew I was gay before I did, which is so strange. It's not exclusively that I was denying it to myself. I also just didn't know. And I guess people could see it. And I don't know what that means because generally when people say they think you're gay, it tends to be about your gender performance, not about your actual, sexual practice, obviously, especially when you're a teenager. It's not like you're having sex in public. So there was a lot of that. There was that I was really good at science and that my English was better than theirs. My Arabic was terrible. That was always something that they'd make fun of me about. That was it. I mean, it doesn't take kids much, right? Kids are very creative. You could say something like, I bought a new book, and that sentence will be used against you for the next 2 years, just because someone decided that it's enough.
I have to say that I also remember you being bullied in school.
Yeah, again, I was still very much the choir kid who was loud and had good English and
Sang in hallways.
yeah, very much. A lot.
I mean, you clearly had such a rough experience in school. Like, how did you persevere? Like, where were your safe havens?
I guess it changed over time. When I was younger, it was always books. When I say I was a troublemaker, I mean, like, I used to skip class and answer teachers back and be very rude and curse and loud and whatever, and, pull pranks on teachers and whatever the hell it was. But I would skip school and go read, right? I would read stuff that wasn't part of our, like, high school curriculum. I'd read stuff for fun and read philosophy because I guess I needed to find justification for believing that everyone was wrong. Which, a lot of books offered. It was my favorite form of escapism until I discovered alcohol. But I guess that kind of kept me going. I also did have like a solid group of really close girlfriends from my first school, and we're still family, right? Like now. And then in college, it was music. It was always music, actually. Even when I was a kid, like, I'd get bullied, but then I'd go home and listen to, like, Pearl Jam and Nirvana and grunge and stuff that was about brooding and being outside, and that felt like it was for people like me, and I found community through that.
Okay, so let's get to that. Let's get to your college days and how this entire journey began. So if you were to place a time and a location to how Mashrou Leila was born, what would it be?
There's a building at the American University of Beirut called West Hall that had a music room in the basement. I was in my first year at design school, and a few people from the architecture grade above us posted a flyer saying they wanted to start a music workshop for people in the architecture and design department. And I ended up in that room with like 15 other people who were sort of just jamming. And the only sort of criteria, I guess, for whatever we produced were that it would have to be completely original. We wouldn't do covers, and it would have to be in Arabic. And that's how it started. That same sort of workshop eventually filtered down to 7 musicians, and we gave ourselves a name, and we started a college band, and for some reason that college band took off, and before we even left college, we were famous, right? Arguably. I mean, famous at that point meant people who weren't your friends knowing what your music was, right? But it was completely surreal. I mean, to think that this started as a college band, and at this point at 31 is still my career.
What's the relationship like between you and your bandmates?
It's complicated, right? At this point, the band has been happening for 10 years, so the stuff that we've been through is crazy, and it's not the kind of stuff that any relationship would endure very easily. So I will say that we have very complicated relationships, but at the same time, we're always in the trenches sort of together, and that matters. And, it's sort of like the way it is with family, where you understand that there's something bigger than you, and bigger than the other person, and that you're both working within that and trying to save that, but you don't always like each other. And that's sometimes beautiful and sometimes really annoying, but we're family.
And when you started Mashrou Leila, was there a mission and an identity back then? Like, did you feel like you had a fully formed kind of identity around the band?
Yeah. I mean, look, we were in art school, right? Which means that we were the most pretentious people you could possibly imagine. And the reason we wanted to make music in Arabic was that, you know, I mean, you and I never listened to any Arabic music in high school, and there is a reason for that. One of them is that, you know, the kind of high schools that we went to meant that we belonged to, I guess, certain classes, and that affected the kind of culture that we had access to. Lebanon is very much a post-colonial country where, you know, the elites of the country are quote unquote westernized, right? But also, you know, if you turn on the radio, even now, if you turn on the radio, there's very little in Arabic popular culture that deals with anything. It's so vacuous and redundant and basic. And I guess we wanted to like fill that gap, right? To try and make music that we thought could reflect people like us and what we were going through and what we were thinking about. I guess we're also like naive enough to think that music could change things, right? That it could make like the world a better place.
What in particular did you want your music to change?
I'm a big proponent, even now, of representation. I think representation really matters. I know that, you know, for example, when I was trying to wrap my head around my sexuality, it made me feel like I was alone, right? That I was a monster because of it. And the sign of a monster is difference. And the sign of difference is that no one else around you is like that, right? So representation, when I was starting to come out, was so important. Even in the dumbest places like Will and Grace, right? But also in Oscar Wilde and David Bowie and Kurt Cobain wearing a dress and Rabi Alameddin, especially the author. Those things meant so much to me. They meant that I wasn't alone, and that made it a lot easier to sort of accept these things about myself. I think when it comes to like political convictions, you know, you and I come from a country where sectarianism rules everything, elitism rules everything. It's a hyper neoliberal, corrupt government and society, and you know, when you see that that's actually how the country is working, it becomes very easy to think that you're the only person who doesn't agree with those politics, because that, again, is the way the country is operating. And I think it matters to put that in music and other art forms. It allows people sort of the cultural artifacts with which they can build community, and it's that community that can actually change things. You know, there's a reason why the first thing you do when a country gains independence, the first thing they do is they make a flag and they, you know, write a national anthem. And the reason for that is that you need art to collectivize around. You create these sort of signs, these symbols of this is a community.
I want to talk about the, I guess, coming out with your sexuality publicly. Like when the band first started, and I may have gotten this wrong. When the band first started, I don't remember that being something that you guys would talk about openly. Like, what was there a decision process that happened when? Like, at what point do you remember deciding, you know what, this is something I actually want to talk about in public?
So I had come out 2 years before we started the band, and then the band happened. They knew I was gay. And it's not that there was never like a Frank Ocean moment, right? Of like coming out and having this statement or anything. It was just always there. Beirut's really small. People knew who I was. It's just no one ever said anything in the press, even though the second or third concert that we played had Shimel Yasmin in it.
Which is a love song to a man.
Which is a love song about the first guy I fell in love with. And I remember the first demo we recorded even that we sent for that radio competition had Shimel Yasmin on it. But it was always there. It's just the press didn't say anything about it until we got really big. And I think a big part of that is that Arab press didn't want to deal with it. And they still kind of don't. The only Arab press that ever brings up my sexuality is Arab press that's trying to call the band Satanists.
And how did the band take it? Was there a discussion internally with you guys about like how you would talk about your sexuality? Because in many ways you started to become labeled as the first openly gay Muslim band of the Middle East.
Yeah, so I mean, we did have a discussion about it because, again, even then, that first video that had any mention of my sexuality, that's when the death threats started, right? And this is really like 2011, maybe 2012. So there did have to be a discussion because it affects everyone. But we all sort of agreed that, you know, they kind of had my back. I'm sure it would have been a lot easier for them if I lied and did things easily. But they respected that I didn't want to. And honestly, I don't think any of us imagined that things would get as bad as they did over the years. To be completely honest, I can't say for a fact that if I knew everything I know now about the price I'd have to pay for just being honest about my sexuality, that I would still do it, right? I'd like to believe that I would. And it's easy to say that when you're already in that position, right? Where, you know, it's just a matter of fact that I have to deal with death threats and intimidation and whatever the hell it is all the time. I've been accused of like witchcraft and Satanism. I can't honestly say that I would necessarily do it again. And it's made me much more sympathetic to people that just don't want to come out, either in the public eye or in their personal lives. It's horrible. It's not fair. And it's stupid that this is 2019 and this is actually still the way things are.
How do you deal with those death threats? They must be so terrifying.
There's nothing I can do about it, right? They are what they are. I'd like to believe that it's just talk. I am 100% certain that at some point it won't just be talk. And then when that happens, we'll see what happens. But, you know, we ask for a lot of security at our shows. We ignore a lot of things. Over the last, week, the scale of things has been so bad that we've actually had to, report to the police in Lebanon. But I don't really have faith in our security apparatus. I'm not sure they're going to do anything about it.
Can you talk to me about the first song Mashrou Leila ever wrote? Who wrote it? How did you write it?
So the first album in general, actually, and the very first song we wrote was, we had just sort of met each other as musicians, and we were very young musicians, and we weren't thinking as songwriters, we were thinking as musicians. And there's a very big distinction there where, as a songwriter, you put the song first. As a musician, you put your own performance first. So what we would do was sort of go around in a circle where we'd have one sort of central theme, right? Like a line. And we'd go around in a circle, each playing that line with our instrument and making variations of it. And it's almost like a vulgar display of musical virtuosity, right? We're like, oh, look how well I can play this, and look at all these passing notes that I can shove in and mess around with the timing. And, I think the very first song we wrote was a song called Mashrou Leila. And Andre, our former guitarist, came up with the chords for that, I think. I can't remember if it was him or Firas, but they came up with the chords for that, and we would just keep playing it and looping it. And I had to write the lyrics, so I took from this surrealist writing exercise that I had literally just learned about in art history class the day before, where, write a sentence and then fold the paper and then just keep writing whatever comes to mind. And eventually try to rationalize it. So I did that and wrote nonsense, and then people started reading all sorts of things into it, which is hilarious. But the song essentially means nothing. Really.
That's it, Leila.
Yeah. It was a song that was intended to mean nothing. And the hilarious part is that people will read so much into any text. It's just the insistence on meaning and significance is amazing.
A quick break from our story today to tell you about another Kerning Cultures Network production, our inaugural show, which is also called Kerning Cultures. In it, we tell stories from the Middle East and its diaspora, like the story about one man's mission to revive specialty coffee in Yemen amidst the current war, or this story about the surprising connection between Lebanon, the country, and a string of small towns in the U.S. with the same name.
I went to South Dakota, Lebanon, South Dakota, and went to the Long Branch Saloon. I sat in and I was talking to her and she said, "What were you from?" And I said, "From Lebanon." And as I said Lebanon, her eyes just lit up. This is where the story gets interesting.
They're the kind of stories that will transport you into other worlds, across the Middle East and the spaces in between. Find us wherever you get your podcasts. That's Kerning Cultures, Kerning with a K. Let's get back into our story today, where Hamid's was telling us about the first song they ever wrote.
How did, our Arabic was not strong. Mm-hmm. Where did you get such Arabic fluency and eloquency? Yeah. That's something I've always wondered about.
In high school, we never spoke Arabic, right? I also didn't do a lot of Arabic at home. My mom was an English professor, and she grew up so even though she's Jordanian, she grew up between Rome and Germany and Morocco, so her Arabic was never that great, and it was just, English has always been the language I think in, it still is, it's the language that I start writing in and then eventually translate back to Arabic, and that's how I learned Arabic, is actually through writing songs and translating. I spend all my time when I'm writing, I spend all my time with a bunch of tabs open on my laptop. One of them is almaani.com. One of them is Google Translate. Arabic is such a beautiful, rich language that is so loaded that any word can mean a billion things. And it makes it easy almost to be poetic, I think.
At what point did you realize wow, I think we have something here?
I think when we won a radio competition in the first year that we started, and we were supposed to get a record deal out of it. But the label went bankrupt and we never actually recorded that album with them. But at the time, the idea of having a record deal, this was 2008, 2009, and we hadn't really wised up to the changes in the music industry. At the time, the idea of getting a record deal was synonymous with making it. Right? If you could get signed, if someone would record you, that's it. You're going to make it. So we started taking things more seriously. We kept making music together. We recorded our first album. When we graduated from college, and the band had started, getting requests to play in Jordan and Egypt, and Syria, which we never did because of the war. And in April, I think 2012, so we weren't making any money off of the band, right? But we decided that the only way to try to do this properly would be to quit our jobs anyway and see what happens. And we would give the band full-time for a year. And if that were to work out, then we would keep doing it. And it did work out. We started playing a lot more. We wrote more. We recorded an album. And none of us looked back, I guess.
When did you realize that you had, like, kind of became famous?
Okay, so this is weird, but I think the first time someone yelled at me at a bar in Beirut and accused me of, they were accusing me of like bastardizing the Arabic language and telling me that I shouldn't be making music. And this guy was a complete stranger. And I remember being so angry and so upset, but then 3 hours later, registering that some stranger knew who I was and what my music was, and that was very weird.
And cared enough to yell at you.
I suppose, yeah, for, all the wrong reasons, but it was still there. And it's one of those things that still kind of like catches me by surprise sometimes. It's weird. I've had a very rough week, for example, because of polemic surrounding the band in Lebanon. And I was at Whole Foods trying to like deal with how sad I was by buying like keto friendly ice cream, which is to say that it didn't have real sugar in it. So I go into Whole Foods to buy some ice cream, and I get stopped by these two really, really, really sweet women who just said the nicest things to me about the band. And it just, when these things happen, it really helps you put things in perspective. It really does help, like, balance out, I guess, the external feedback loop. The gratification and the validation that you get from people who actually like the band does sometimes actually help counter the amount of hate that the band gets as well.
I want to go back on the blasphemy thing.
We live in a context where, again, even saying free speech or saying women's equality is considered radical. And this isn't to say that it's just the Arab world, right? This region is just as bad with that, right? 100%. And has clearly, the experiment of the civil rights movement here and what that brought us to clearly kind of failed on a lot of levels, because we're still dealing with the KKK and with income inequality and with rape culture. So clearly, this region didn't get it right either. But if we're going to be honest, you can say something here, right? But you can't say anything in the Arab world without that being treated like blasphemy or without you being seen as a political radical in that threatening national safety, literally by writing a song saying women should have rights, right? Or we should have civil marriage, or whatever it is. Like, these things aren't actually radical, they're basic.
I want to talk about your performance and your art, like your actual voice. So, first of all, did you ever take any kind of like voice lessons or anything like that?
No, but I did over the years sort of like train myself and do stupid online tutorials and stuff like that. So I don't know if I can say I'm untrained in that sense. I'm maybe self-trained is the right word.
It's kind of amazing.
Thanks.
And before you go on stage, I've seen you in concert a couple times, and there's like a presence as soon as you step on to the platform, the stage, wherever you are. And I wonder how you prepare for a concert, both in your performance and then also in your voice itself, because in many ways your voice is not just like a voice, it's an instrument. It's a musical instrument.
I warm up before shows, so I kind of know how to warm up enough to protect my voice, I guess, which I had to figure out because I, at some point, just kept getting laryngitis before shows, and it's because I wasn't taking care of my voice. And I don't think there's anything that you can do about preparing yourself for the performance part of things. I mean, literally just being a body on stage under scrutiny by too many people. It's just, the stage is a very weird place to be, right? I'm very comfortable being on stage singing to 10,000 people. I am much less comfortable being on stage singing to 300 people, and I will never in my life be able to stand up at a dinner table, at a dinner party, and start singing. And the reason I'm saying those three things are separate is that, you and I are in this room right now talking, right? There's a certain volume that we understand that we should be speaking at. If I get too loud, that's construed as aggression or arrogance even, right? When you're on stage, it's the other way around. You're literally given physical elevation above an audience, right? There's this you're 1.5 meters higher up than everyone else, and you're given amplification so that you're loud enough that every single person in the room can hear you, and they can hear you louder than they can hear each other. So it's essentially not a social function. So when you get up on stage, you're not, I'm not there to be Hamid, right? Like the person who I am with my friends or my family or my boyfriends or whatever it is. You're there to be something that happens on stage. And it's amazing because you get to experience 2 hours of not being yourself. And it's incredible. And obviously the smaller an audience is, the more intimate it is, the closer it is to an actual social interaction. And that's why it gets really frightening, because then people's judgments or people's reactions to what you're doing become closer to your actual person than to this weird persona that happens on stage. I still get so much performance anxiety and stage anxiety, and I freak out for the entire day before a show, and it just gets worse throughout the day until I'm on stage. And for a few years, I tried to deal with that by drinking before getting on stage, and I made a mess of myself repeatedly. I don't understand how I still have a career. No, seriously, the first time we played in DC, I literally went on a 45-minute monologue yelling at the entire audience for letting Bernie lose the primaries. Seriously. It's like no one's there for that. But, when I got sober, I guess I learned that anxiety just means that you really care about what you're doing, and that anxiety is actually just a lot of energy that you can then channel into a billion directions, and it's productive in that sense. It's useful. It's really easy to take all that anxiety and then at some moment on stage turn that into you jumping around a lot and being very energetic and dancing and just doing all those things that can make music contagious to an audience that's watching a live performance.
What about what you wear?
I guess the rules of thumb are, so I sweat a lot like most Arabs. So I wear a lot of black because it hides that. I also am constantly struggling with my weight. So again, black makes it easier. Essentially, it's anything that makes you feel good, that makes you feel far enough removed from who you are socially that you can pretend to be someone else and someone who's better than yourself for an hour and a half. Anything that helps you get into the role. With method acting, one way of sort of staying in character is also to just stay in costume. And I feel like getting on stage is like that. You don't want to feel like yourself. You don't want to wear what you're wearing to brunch. You want to wear something outrageous and unsocial and unfathomable. There's nothing that I wear on stage that I could possibly wear on the subway. And that's the point, sort of.
Yeah. And sexy like Tina Turner.
And sexy like Tina Turner, definitely.
I know you mentioned struggling with your weight. It's something I've struggled with as well. I know we've run into each other at the gym trying to change that. And I wonder, being in the public eye, someone scrutinizing my body would terrify me and probably break me into a million pieces. How do you do it?
So look, it's not just being in the public eye. People actually have the nerve. I mean, again, especially the Lebanese, what we're like. We tell each other about, the first thing we say to each other when we see each other is, oh my God, you gained weight or you lost weight or whatever. And sometimes it's actually really well intended. And I'm not going to say I'm above it. I do it all the time. Where like but I only do it when I mean it, where if I see someone and they look amazing, I think it's important to tell them. Yeah. That said, the only time the worst that my struggle ever got with that was in college. I did pick up a really, really, really bad eating disorder, and I think no one talks about men with eating disorders, which is horrible, and it's disproportionately common in the gay male community because of these absurd body expectations that we have. I got a really, really, really bad eating disorder in college. I ended up in a hospital, and the only reason that happened wasn't because I was trying to react to people telling me anything about my body. It was because I was trying to look good enough for a man who broke my heart, right? And sometimes just obsessing about your body becomes a way to feel like you're in control of things. That's the toxic part of eating disorders that people don't really talk about, is that it actually makes you feel like you're in control. And that can be so dangerous. And that's why it's so dangerous, is that everything always feels out of control, especially when you're depressed. And eating disorders are just this thing to latch onto sometimes. It makes it really hard to stop.
Yeah. Are you good now?
I am good now. I don't have like the eating problems that I used to have.
I want to talk about next steps. What is next for you?
So I'm in New York right now. I moved here 3 months ago, and I am writing. I'm working on some solo stuff. We're touring around the US in September.
And what's the craziest thing a fan has ever asked you to do?
It was not necessarily crazy. It was actually just kind of offensive. Someone asked me, I was signing autographs in Beirut this one time, and someone asked me to sit on her face. And
is
I said it in English. Okay. And I was so offended.
Mashrou Leila is going on a North American tour beginning this September 2019, so if you're in the US or Canada, be sure to check out those tour dates. Selected music today from Mashrou Leila. You can listen to the band and all their albums on Spotify. This episode was produced by Dana Balut and myself, Hiba Fisher, with editorial support by Lina Mohammed and Alex Atack. Sound design by Mohammed Khezat and fact-checking by Zaina Douider. Our original sting was composed by Ramzi Bashur, and El Empire is produced by Kerning Cultures. A huge thank you, of course, to Hamid Sinno for giving us his time for this interview. All of our guests are sons and daughters, fathers and brothers, and they're building their empires. They're extremely busy people, and so it really means a lot to us that they trusted us with their time. Thank you, Hamid. And next week on El Empire.
And so numbers can help me to do that. So I literally just start researching, and then what I very often do is I will get those numbers and do them into a very classic chart type. And I will just look through the different chart types. I'll take that same data set and look at it as a bar chart, a pie chart, a line chart. And I'll see which of those feels like it communicates the data the best. And then I think about the subject that I'm talking about here.
That's in 1 week. Lastly, if you're liking El Empire, please subscribe to the show so you'll never miss an episode. Also, leave a rating and review on whatever podcast app you're listening to us from. It really helps boost our rankings so that other listeners can find out about us in the podcast libraries. Thanks for listening.